Creativity, imagination, and the need to think differently are shaping the future of healthcare as much as data, AI, and digital health technologies. I'm Drew Beck, your host for this special series of the Syneos Health Podcast, and I'm inviting you to explore how the bold themes from our most recent Health Trends report are taking shape through industry collaboration and driving meaningful impact for patients. Welcome to the Syneos Health Podcast, 2025 Health Trends Edition. In this week's special edition of our Health Trends Podcast, we're going to speak to a couple experts, one from our clinical group, the other from our commercial group, about how Omnichannel has evolved over the past decade and what's new and emerging today and in the years ahead. I have AJ and Helen, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves to get started off. Helen, how about you?
I am Helen Green. I am the Head of Recruitment and Retention Strategy at Syneos Health, which is part of our clinical division and focuses on getting patients into clinical trials and making them aware of them in various ways. Looking forward to this discussion.
Excellent. And so, Helen, I love to ask this question. What's a recent comment you've heard from a client or sponsor around Omnichannel that's really stuck with you?
So we were presenting one of our recruitment strategies and retention, of course, as well, for a trial. And a client from their commercial side was part of the call. And they turned around to us and said, well, isn't this just Omnichannel? And we said, well, yes, but there's no just to that one. So it's certainly getting embedded very heavily on our side of the business.
Excellent. So great to hear it. AJ, how about you? The floor is yours.
Hi, I'm AJ Triano. I oversee customer experience and omnichannel for communications in our communications division. And I'll answer that same question, although I think it's really funny, Helen, that the word just would be described. It's kind of like when websites and responsive design was around and everyone's like, well, it's just a website. It's like, oh boy. One of the most interesting things I think I continue to hear repeatedly is clients say, we're really going to do omnichannel now, but the thing we need help with is all on the technology and the data side. We've got the content. We're good. And what's interesting about that is that most brands do have a wealth of content, but they create most of that content when they launch. And when you think about who you're talking to at launch, you're talking to a net new population. So all of your content is focused on aspirational messaging. Hey, we're here. We're just launched. You could please try us, that kind of stuff. It's not really written for people who are later in the journey. And so all the content gets bunched up front, not later on. So it doesn't really work well in omnichannel.
We should start this topic by addressing the elephant in the room. It's that we are acknowledging that omnichannel is in fact still a trend in 2025. But I believe I wrote my first omnichannel trend in 2016. And even that, I may have been a bit late to the party. But as we think about where we stand today and we look across medium and large pharma, for example, emerging biotech, there are countless stories of successful execution of pieces of omnichannel. There are some brands, in fact, that have had a sort of omnichannel experience, but where we sit today is a far cry as an industry from the experience that many of us enjoy as consumers from big global consumer brands like Netflix and what Amazon's exposing us to and others. Before we dive into any of the content, AJ, Helen, anything you'd like to piggyback on that intro?
From our side in clinical, it's 10 years further down the line from where we tend to see most commercial work. And I think that that's exactly what we're starting to see now, bringing together a lot of the efforts that have been going on over the last 10 years to finally start resonating with clients, to start resonating, in fact, in even the way we're thinking about reaching out to all the different stakeholders who touch patients or a patient decision-making pathway. And that is at its core what omnichannel really means to us. And so absolutely, it's great to see it swinging back into the fore here.
Agreed. AJ, how about you?
I think what's really cool about all the conferences that we've been attending this year is that you described the pivot that I've heard from the main stage and all the breakout sessions. And we've gone from talking about the potential and the future state and the promise of what omnichannel can bring. And instead, what we're now talking about is practical application and lessons learned from applying it. And yes, most of that context is about a transformation journey where they're in the midst of going from multi-channel to cross-channel to omni-channel, but they're sharing real experiences. Like, we learned this when we did X, instead of saying someday data is going to allow us to personalize the experience for our physicians or for our patients and so on.
AJ, I think that's beautifully said. Right? I know as we prepared for this conversation, we talked a lot about a key enabler of omnichannel today, and that's the co-emergence of AI is a real usable tool and partner in many ways in this space. Today's discussion is by no means just about AI, but AI is a big part of the conversation around what's allowing us to do some of those omni-channel specific tasks at scale, allowing us to create more individualized journeys that in many ways felt very, very labor intensive, almost prohibitively so. And it's helping us create those kinds of standout experiences, even in our highly regulated environment. AJ, we talked about the tension between the promise of it, as you've said, and now the real world application and the build out of omnichannel capabilities. Would you share that from your perspective?
I think as we're in a place of acceptance that it is a required transformation for brands to make, we're still dealing then with the reconciliation of what that means from both a workflow process, such as how you get content through regulatory, with the context of business rules and about how personalization can happen at scale and still allow compliance. That is as much a legal and a risk question as it is a workflow process question. How do you push that through regulatory? So reconciling that with the marketing dollars that are necessary to create all the content and all of those experiences. The push for that, it's a healthy tension. It's one that has to go through, but it's at odds with itself in the industry, because what we can do in countries like the United States, where privacy laws enable us to do more one-to-one data-driven marketing, is not what we can do globally. And so the real interesting tension point that pharma marketers have to address is, what the heck does omnichannel even mean to me at a global level? Because it's not really truly omnichannel outside of the United States, but yet we call it omnichannel. So I think it's an interesting question for our clients to address.
AJ, I never thought 20 years ago when I was getting my philosophy degree, it'd be as applicable to the life science space in omnichannel. A, omnichannel wasn't a word when I was in undergrad, but B, that real philosophical question. I've wrestled with it this year with multiple clients as they say, we want to call it omnichannel globally for the spirit of cohesion and everything else, but it is a very different animal in markets like the US than it is in other global markets. Are we better using a more blanket term like digital marketing? But in that way, you then have other gaps, right? Other things that are underrepresenting the capabilities there. It's been such an interesting thing. And to be clear, if any of you happen to talk to my mom and dad, please reinforce them how valuable that philosophy degree was in my professional career, as they both questioned whether or not it would pay dividends in the long run. Helen, how about you from the global perspective and also from a perspective outside of commercial? What are you hearing in terms of that tension?
On the clinical side of the business, we are more limited both in the US and globally, because we have to go through ethics committee reviews. They have to see every piece of communication that goes out. And that really does limit that one-to-one marketing that you can do. But it also opens up opportunities, perhaps rest of world, that we don't necessarily see on the commercial side. And when we're talking about omnichannel, it isn't just about the digital touch points that exist. It's about how they actually coalesce with all the physical touch points. At the end of the day, the discussion between a patient and a physician tends to happen in a room over a desk somewhere. And that's something that we on the digital side that we're driving to, that we're helping support those conversations and that access to. And really linking all of those together and being able to connect the end point of that offline conversation with the online activities that were happening is really where we're starting to get that broad matrixed omni-channel experience. And that is something that does happen globally on the clinical side, albeit with some limitations.
Great call outs both. Another topic I'd love to hear your perspective on is that spirit of how do we meet regulatory requirements, legal expectations, like how do we do this compliantly? AJ, I'd love you to talk a little bit about some of the tools. A few I can think of off the top of my head. VivaVault, having additional resources for commercial MLR. Maybe some of the AI tools are going to embed it around red light, green light, yellow light highlighting around where to spend their time and those types of things. AJ, will you get our listeners up to speed on a couple of those topics?
Sure. I think the number one thing that everyone has to start with is e-consent. It is more than just making sure you've got a cookie management system like OneTrust or something like that, governing opt-ins and opt-outs of cookies. It's also about recognizing that as a brand, you have to switch your mindset and your spend of dollars away from buying third-party lists to coming up with real strategies that offer compelling value to your customers that would then drive them to say, yeah, I want to hear more from you. I'll opt in. One thing that has not changed, it's actually gotten more stringent, is our willingness as humans to part with an email address and certainly a phone number for SMS and the like in exchange for something. The value exchange is extremely high from an expectation standpoint. I'm going to give you that. You'd better give me something in return. And I see a lot of pharma companies falling into the trap that I think CPG has finally started to get out of, which is just to say, hey, opt in. I'll communicate with you. Trust me, it'll be worth it. And instead, it has to be upfront. You actually have to say on the opt-in page or before, I want you to opt in because, and then answer the question of why it's valuable to that person. So once you get that done and you get that out of the way, that opens up the play field, if you will, allowing you to do more, because omnichannel is ultimately data-driven marketing, where the goal is to change the experience, to personalize, to tailor to that individual based on what we know about them and based on the actions that we were able to understand that they took. So that's where the whole idea of next best action comes in, that based on what I know and what you've done, the next best thing I think or want you to do is X. Data is the currency that drives that. It's the heartbeat. So the opt-in is crucial to that. The next big thing is content. And what's been really neat is to see the transformation of industry players. You mentioned Viva. They have gone directly into the world of modular content creation and management in their digital asset management tools, and that's connected into PromoMats. And that allows you to create ecosystems of content pre-approved with the business rules, the governance all managed. That is particularly useful in a global context. Global brand wanting to push content out to affiliates and the like. But what's also interesting is how they have transformed their data architecture to have a uniform data architecture on the back end as they've moved away from Salesforce. And in doing that, they've created high volume data pipes to enable Gen AI applications to create better CRM tools within their walled garden so that you can actually start to create next best action experiences within Viva's world and not just struggle with trying to get the data across the walled garden into other systems like Adobe and Salesforce and the like. And we're at the beginning of that. So I think that we have to watch very closely rapid transformation spurned on, of course, by Gen AI.
Personally, as a not so long ago marketer, I was leading healthcare professional marketing at a pharmaceutical company, and we felt pretty bleeding edge. We were doing some pretty innovative things. And this is within not just the past decade, this was about 5 years ago. And the way we were thinking about trying to enable modular content, even to a pretty well-defined set of audiences, was so manually intensive, and especially around the MLR process. Even with us, if I were to put us on a bell curve, I would have called us top 10% in terms of the agility we demonstrated as an organization in getting content reviewed and approved for commercial purposes. And it would still look as if we were living in the Neolithic era compared to what we're able to do with Viva Vault and other tools now. Helen, how about to you? So as you think about the patients and other clinical audiences in terms of omnichannel, what are a couple more areas that have evolved in this past year, of whether we talk about capital O omnichannel or maybe lowercase o omnichannel, that you're really finding out?
I think one of the key things is actually in the pre-preparation of patient audiences. This is outside of a specific clinical trial, but actually creating resources of patients beforehand. And that's where we can use a lot of the big uppercase omnichannel efforts in order to help drive that. And we are seeing companies offer the next best action on the back of the information that is being gathered. And this is really leveraging AI, ML. It's quite innovative for us in this space to be able to do this. And the next best action coming out is quite often matching them to a trial that is right for them. But it can also be matching them to an approved treatment that perhaps they haven't tried yet. And so we're starting to see this crossover and this merger between the commercial world and the clinical. And we are seeing efforts in clinical accelerating much faster than they have over the past 5 or 10 years previously.
I'm really excited that you brought out another trend that I think intersects here, and that is those of us that are on the CRO side, when we think of the words capital C clinical, we have a very specific thing in mind. I think a trend that's really been emerging over the last half a decade or so is that intersection, the merging of those two things. I'm a patient living with a rare disease. I'm a patient living with a specific subtype of a common chronic illness. And as I try to navigate the very challenging landscape of what good care for me, not just people like me, looks like, we may see an intersection between commercially available products and current clinical trials to find the right solution for me. We still have a very, very long journey to go, especially for people not close to academic centers. But that piece, I think, is a real opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is a big crossover into omnichannel as part of that. Trials are becoming more and more personalized and more specific to the type of patient they're looking for. Specific genomic markers, specific concomitant medication. There's lots of intricacies between whether or not you're eligible to take part. And that has become increasingly more complicated. And therefore, of course, it's significantly harder to find the right patient. And at the end of the day, data is only a part of the reason that patients are eligible to take part in a trial. The other 50% is their willingness to stand up, sign a consent form. And I heard you mention e-consent before, and it's funny, we use the same word, but in a slightly different context. But again, that is all very much a data-driven journey. And people have to put their trust in the data, in the tech that's capturing it, and the physician itself. And we have to have a mix of selecting the right patients via their data, via their genomic markers, but also being able to communicate to them why the trial is the right thing to do, why this particular study versus many of the others that are out there. And that's where a large intersection with commercial comes. And I think that patient recruitment and retention in particular is where that intersection actually lives. I mean, if we're talking a Venn diagram, we are that middle part of it. And I'm a biochemist, so Venn diagrams come very easily to me versus philosophy degrees potentially. But this is the heart and soul of what we're about, is bringing together the data, the tech, the people. And again, for us, that's very much what's driving omnichannel. It's what's driving the innovations that we're seeing in this space. And that will only continue as they continue to build in commercial and we bring those learnings over.
AJ, I don't know if you noticed the grin on my face that started spreading as Ellen began to talk about the clinical world, but I grinned because of our shared friendship over the past 10 years around omnichannel and other things. I can't help but think about some of our commercial clients who sit atop a portfolio of therapeutic area solutions. We think about some of those initial pioneering omnichannel experiences and opportunities. A lot of that was born of medium and large pharma organizations that had a vested interest in helping create a more omnichannel story and experience around a bevy of products so that then the clinician can help pick the right therapy for her patient and the patient can advocate for her own therapy in an effective way. It's encouraging to me to know that even though each of us sit in quite different spaces now, we can still learn from each other. And I think that's one of the ahas I hope our listeners take away from this piece is that now omnichannel really is happening across the entire life science spectrum. Basically, from the moment an asset or molecule is discovered, as we think about clinical development, omnichannel has a place there. The place may be different. Its relevance may be different. But the presence of relevance is there all the way through loss of patent exclusivity. Fast forward a few decades, still there's an opportunity for omnichannel. And because we've been on this tough road over the past 10 years of in some ways overhyping or over-anticipating what it can deliver in the present within the confines of our current technological capabilities in terms of our teams and workflows, I think there's a lot of fail forward fast mentality that we can probably share to save each of us as we then emerge into different spaces to be quite relevant there. Let's look right now at the present. AJ, will you tell me a couple examples of some cutting edge things that are today possible in terms of omnichannel, of engaging patients, providers, or other audiences on the commercial side?
Yeah, I think a lot of the companies that we work with are hovering around the same question. How can we use data to better inform field prioritization, both in terms of the target, who and when they call on someone, but also the topic of what they want to say or what should be said. And I'm going to set aside for a moment the traditional challenge of the industry, which is worry of Big Brother, that data is going to somehow cause home office to be staring over the shoulder of the rep, reducing their autonomy. And I respect the concern there. I'm not going to go into that here. I'm just going to set it aside and acknowledge that that is an existing question for some company cultures. But the reality is that the data itself can empower the rep to be way more effective and give them more tools to be more autonomous if it's embraced in that way. And what I mean by that is that we have seen the use of data mining for many years to better understand the market potential of a space and use that to inform a rep. But now with Omnichannel, assuming opt-in and consent's in place, we're able to inform that decision-making by bringing in the non-personal promotion interaction touch points that marketing drives. Did the physician open an email focused on efficacy from the home office? If they did, should the rep follow up on that, or should the rep continue to the next topic of importance to make sure that the precious time that is afforded to a brand by a doctor is getting the furthest reach? Of course, it would sound very big brotherish to go in and say, hey, I know you opened that email on efficacy. Do you have any questions about it? That's not the intention, of course, but being able to go in and with the knowledge that efficacy was recently covered, I could choose to double down and make sure I started with that, or I could move on to the next topic in a content strategy. What's supercharging that is, of course, Gen AI and the ability to apply algorithms to that. And we're seeing a significant number of companies take traditional segmentation and the data sources from it, like how many scripts did a doctor write for this brand? How many scripts does a doctor typically write for a new product? So their propensity to write or adopt something new, their access to patients who are diagnosed in their local region, their referral patterns, and then look at non-personal promotion interaction data and blend all that together in a blender and spit out recommendations to the rep that says, we really think you might want to consider calling on these people right now because they're hand raising. They're doing things that would indicate they're really interested right now. Strike while the iron's hot. Oh, and here are some topics you might want to say. So like I said, there are lots of companies that are hovering around that. And I do think that that is a bleeding edge of Omnichannel's potential in a personal and non-personal intersection.
AJ beautifully said, an interesting bridge into my world now. I help lead our training organization within Syneos. And one of the things that I found is an unprecedented shift over the past couple years for medium and large pharma companies that already sit on established curricula to upskill their marketers, their field teams, and all these other things to have a very specific omni-channel lens, to come to us asking, I've got good marketing training, I've got good sales training, but there's this other thing, this omni-channel thing that I don't feel like my employees have a great grasp on how it's relevant to their role. And we build multiple academies over the past 2 years. We built both curricula, add-on curricula, those types of things, because while it doesn't fundamentally change the role of the marketer or her sales counterpart, it does change in what good looks like in their role. It involves what skills are required. It involves what strategic thinking is required to do your job right. And AJ, I think it begins to touch on that third rail that you flagged at the beginning. Some of these things that in the past would have felt either big brothery or something around home office, if we're really clear and transparent around why we're making a next best action suggestion on what the relevance is of this omni-channel message that was delivered to your customer field team member, it's not about policing. It's about creating a single conversation through multiple voices and through multiple touch points. And I think that that's been very interesting through the training lens to see how quickly that's followed on and connected to it. Helen, how about you? So when we think about the clinical side, let's talk about today. Can you give us a couple anecdotes or examples of some things that you're seeing gain critical mass in your space in Omnichannel?
Yeah, absolutely. So the primary one is direct-to-patient outreach via digital channels. So this is something that in the US, we pull in as many of those digital touch points as we can and merge together the data that we have access to, that we've brought in with our recruitment sources, and then obviously track all of that and then learn back. And that is something that is being as seriously data-driven decision-making that is actually a real game changer when we're looking at such small subpopulations. We may only be looking for 50 people across the whole of the United States. But what's really exciting when it comes to clinical recruitment is that we are also doing direct patient outreach outside of the US, which is something when it comes to commercial drugs is significantly more limited. Throughout Europe, the majority of the countries have significantly changed their stance on that over the past few years. And we're starting to get insights into how data is perceived, how it's being used, and how we can use that, albeit to a lesser degree, to inform the same type of decision-making throughout Europe. And that is something that's really quite exciting. And the other thing is that I was talking about e-consent earlier, and the informed consent form is a critical part to make sure patients are very well versed in taking part in a trial. What normally it consists of is, of course, the form itself and an e-signature. But it also normally has hyperlinks out so that patients can query a word or ask questions, FAQs on things that they may not understand. The clinical landscape is full of lots of complex terminology. And what we're seeing is actually a report coming to the physician of what that specific patient has clicked on, and then help for the physician to answer those particular questions from the patient directly out of what they've queried in this informed consent electronic form. And that is a really nice segue of data into that offline conversation, which often we see drop because patients don't want to admit that they don't necessarily understand something.
And they're not alone. Physicians feel the same way. Many other clinical roles. It's a human thing. It's really hard for us to express ignorance as a species. And I think that piece connects the dots. So I'd love to land on kind of a hypothesis that we came up with together in our preparation for this. And the way I would capture it, and AJ, Helen, keep me honest here, is our hypothesis is there's a future for omnichannel within each stage of the asset's life cycle. I'd love to give you, Helen, the floor first. Where do you see in the next 6 months to 4 or 5 years out, really future state of omnichannel in that piece of the business?
I think that there's a lot of scope for this, and we are already seeing quite a lot of it done outside of patient recruitment, but basically a progression of synthetic trial arms. So we're taking data that people are capturing on their iPhones or their watches or their Fitbit as they're going running and plugging that into basically the clinical trial makeup so that we can understand better what patient populations are living like day to day without needing to go through the steps of a trial process and be on the placebo. So not receiving any type of drug or medication as part of the trial. This synthetic control arm is quite a growing thing. It's relatively revolutionary, but I think it's something that we're going to start to see grow, and that will significantly, completely change how we're viewing patients, how we're viewing trials, and even the role of the physician within that.
One other thing that I heard from another one of my clinical friends and colleagues was as we think about not just patient recruitment, but site selection and all these other things too, as we as an industry move from the blockbuster era into the post-blockbuster era, the thing I say often is essentially we are moving from playing roulette to playing blackjack. Roulette arguably is focused on placing theoretically strategic bets, but on the front end, and it's all or nothing. We made a tremendous investment in this asset's clinical program, and we're hoping it's a commercial success. And either it's black or it's red. And at the end of the day, most tended to be in the red. Now we look at evolving as we focus on more niche disease areas, not only rare disease, but personalized medicine, so many other places. We're not measuring our patient populations in the tens or hundreds of millions. We're measuring them in the hundreds and thousands or up to hundreds of thousands. And so what we're doing is, as an industry, we're doing more launches. We're playing more hands of blackjack. And it's in many ways arguably the only casino game where a very intelligent player with a sufficient investment made and the opportunity to play enough hands can beat the house, right? Can win. When we think about this omni-channel opportunity, these great blackjack players, it's going to be very important for them to leverage every compliant and appropriate strategy they can to win the hand. And I think that includes being very choiceful in their site selection, being very intentional about finding and retaining patients in those things so that we can keep these trials both tight and highly successful so that then we can reach those rarer spaces and focus on more niche markets. Helen, anything you'd add to that before we move to commercial?
Really just to say that it's not just in the rare space, but currently we take the approach that we need quantity in order to hit the patient numbers that we're expecting, to get the data in that we're expecting. And that's quantity of sites and quantity of physicians as well as patients. And Omnichannel will actually allow us to move into a world where we are talking about quality over quantity. So how many patients are already at a site? Can we select them? And really use real world data to drive, to your point, feasibility, site selection, and ultimately patient recruitment as well. And so we're getting into a much more targeted, a much more personalized and specific messaging process.
I think what's so interesting about that is in many ways, AJ, you and I've talked a lot about what does an end-to-end omni-channel overview look like? The phases include targeting, selecting the right content/story, and then analysis. In its simplest, most distilled form, it's about picking the right audiences and understanding them and what they need well, creating the right kind of content to deliver those audiences, and then delivering it and making sure that it actually resonated with. It sounds to me like even outside of me limiting you to omnichannel, that's what's being done, right? That is the future of successful clinical trial design. AJ, will you bring us home? So we've talked about the early phases up until the moment of a potential approval and launch. Let's look at launch through loss of exclusivity. Where do you see the next few months to few years in terms of omnichannel's impact and capability?
Well, I actually think it still starts with clinical and Helen's comments. The question I think that does not get asked enough, and that I would encourage our clients in an industry to ask every day, so why am I using any tool? Right now we're talking about omnichannel, but what is the end objective? If I just ask that in general, almost everybody would say acquisition. I've got to drive sales. I've got to drive new starts. The acquisition is predominantly the focus of all of the content we create, the targeting efforts, the choices we make to use these technologies. But what it misses is the important role of retention. Thinking about what Helen said earlier, where we are so focused now, thankfully, in areas of rare disease, trying to bring help to people who desperately need it, but are few in number. Finding those people, acquisition, is hard. But a trial is successful when you keep somebody in the trial, and it's more beneficial when you keep someone in the trial and you complete it faster. So retention becomes extremely important. And omnichannel doesn't have to be this massive thing that is like 15 channels and all of that. It just needs to be a small focused set of channels that uses data to tailor the experience. So one of the things I've always thought would be beneficial is looking at some form of CRM to help those who have enrolled in a clinical trial stay enrolled, in part by delivering just-in-time information about their upcoming visit to a site or activities they need to do to remind them to complete the journals they've got to take, reduce the friction, trying to strike very carefully the balance of not influencing them, because of course you do not want to introduce bias into something that would cause their results to not be useful. But I think there is a line to be struck. Well, that same question gets pulled through as you commercialize. Yes, of course, you're going to focus on acquisition because you're launching a product. If your brand is benefiting from a marketplace where the therapy treats a disease where everybody under their sun has it or is likely to get it, then you don't care about retention because there's always somebody else new to acquire. But for the most part, as you mature as a brand and you get past launch, you need to shift your focus to something like a retention question. How do you get people to stay on therapy, even if it's only one or two more script fills? And so omnichannel and its purpose needs to evolve. The content, who you target, the data you use to target them, the content you use to serve them needs to evolve as your brand evolves in maturity in the same way. So brand matures, omnichannel matures. So our job isn't done with just simply launching and hitting go on an omnichannel campaign.
Well, I, for one, feel better about my job security in this industry after this conversation. Here's kind of the closing thought. So first off, thank you, AJ. Thank you, Helen, for taking the time and for sharing your brilliant insights. To me, my takeaways from this are we are still in a phase of omnichannel's evolution. We are now making it more practical than ever. We are adopting it as an industry in more and more places. What we need to do is keep piloting. It sounds to me like AJ, in your world on the commercial side, Helen, in your world on the clinical side, we still don't have everything figured out. There is not an airtight solution for anything yet. And so this is still going to be a period of piloting new tools, emerging new technologies, and making sure we have the right experience, knowledge, and expertise within our organizations, or developing it to be fully transparent, so that we can keep accomplishing what we all set out, probably what we all joined this industry to do, which is to help more people live long, full, healthy lives by getting access to therapies that can really help them.
That's all for today's episode of the Syneos Health Podcast. I'm your host, Drew Beck. If you have other topical issues you'd like to hear on this podcast, please send us a message at podcast@syneoshealth.com. And for access to more future-focused, actionable life science insights, please visit the Syneos Health Insights Hub at insightshub.health. Syneos Health, shortening the distance from lab to life.